This video is sponsored by Squarespace, the best way to make an amazing website. It has never been more difficult to choose between an 11-inch and a 12.9-inch iPad Pro, especially since Apple has supercharged these with the new M1 chip that supports Thunderbolt. We have new software that's coming out, and of course now you have to choose not only based on size, but if you want an LCD display or if you want the new mini LED XDR screen. But by the end of this video, I will make this choice easy for you, because today we're gonna cover everything from performance and thermal throttling to the speaker differences, and of course look at the displays to tell you which one you should buy. But before we jump in, I wanna give a shout out to the sponsor of this video, Squarespace. If you've been thinking about making your own website, Squarespace is seriously the best way to go. You can build a great looking website like we did with literally no web making experience. And it doesn't matter if you want a portfolio, a blog, e-commerce, or anything else. You just simply choose a template and customize blocks of text and images, and then easily move them around. It's incredibly simple, it's affordable, and ours have been running flawlessly for over 3 years now, bringing in tons of traffic thanks to its built-in SEO tools. Start your free 2-week trial with no credit card required by going to squarespace.com/maxtech or by using the custom link down below. And when you're ready to launch, you'll save 10% off your first purchase of a website or domain. Let's start out with the size and the weight in hand. As you guys could tell, there is a big difference between these two. When you look online, it's hard to tell, and even just using the 12.9-inch like I did in the earlier video, it seemed fine. It seemed, like a decent size, not that much bigger. But when you put these side by side, oh my goodness, the difference is dramatically noticeable. Now, the other thing that I could tell is that the 12.9-inch, it not only feels a lot heavier, noticeably heavier in the hand, it feels thicker as well. Now, I've personally always went with the smaller size iPads, and I've used the iPad Pro for hours in my hand without any issues, but holding the 12.9-inch and using it, I feel like after maybe a half hour, an hour, depending on how much muscle you have, your arm or your hand will get tired of holding it out in the air like this. But along with that, it really depends on what you want to do with your iPad. If you're just using simple apps, you're looking at photos, you're doing some web browsing, this extra screen doesn't really add a lot because you can only read one thing at a time. And with that as well, if you're doing things like photo editing, you may think that, oh, I need the larger display. But taking a look at this, I'm not getting much more compared to the 11-inch. If you have creators like Adobe and they're making applications that are optimized, they make them really nice, so where I really have no issue using them on the smaller iPad. I can see my photo, I can zoom in and out, I can adjust all the sliders. They're designed really well. Like the menu bar goes away right there. The 11-inch has no issue with that. But if you're somebody that wants to do things like video editing, for example, running Luma Fusion, here, even with this larger iPad, once you have things like your different layers applied, and this is a very simple timeline, you guys can see how much smaller the actual viewer is. And then if we go ahead and open that up on the smaller one, that's where it gets really tough. Look how small that is right there. And this is even a simple project. You can get crazy with a lot of different layers. And this, for example, video editing is when I would really want to have the larger 12.9-inch. And if you're somebody that often draws or creates and you want to have a larger canvas, or if you're a pro user and you want to do the split screen, that is where the 12.9-inch model really comes in handy. So as far as which one to choose based on size, I would say if you're somebody that mainly uses an iPad as an iPad, you run different apps, maybe play some games, you watch videos, and then you do some productivity, the 11-inch iPad is definitely the better one. The 12.9 right now, I've been holding it for a little over an hour. My hand is getting really tired. But if you're a professional, you're making the most out of your iPad, you're doing a lot of productivity, then I say the 12.9-inch is the better choice. But that is just based on the screen size. We have a lot more to cover. And before we cover those things, such as the thermal throttling with the smaller chassis and the display, we have to mention keyboard cases. We have Apple's new white Magic Keyboard case. And not only does a 12.9-inch, it's bulkier, it's heavier, when you add on this keyboard case, it adds on a dramatic amount of thickness and weight. So now this thing weighs quite a bit more than the 11-inch one with that keyboard case. And I know for some people, if you buy something that's big and heavy, for example, a DSLR camera or even a 16-inch MacBook Pro, if it's inconvenient, if it's heavy, a lot of times you leave it at home, and then if you buy something like a MacBook Air or the smaller combo here, you're much more likely to take it with you. So you have to keep that in mind. Now, as far as the actual keyboards themselves, with that larger display, you do have larger keys. So this feels a little bit more cramped. I have used this extensively and you do get used to it, but with the 12.9 inch, this is a full-size keyboard just like on a Mac. So you are gonna have a more familiar typing experience. It is gonna feel a little bit better. And along with that, we have two more differences with these cases. The first one is how much room it takes up. I was just on an airplane, I was doing a lot of editing, and having this larger one that sits up much higher, it doesn't give you a lot of room if you're on the little tiny tray table, and if somebody leans back, it doesn't work well. Where the 11 inch, it's actually perfect for people that fly, unless you can always pay for first class. Now the other difference is, if you're somebody that likes to use your device on your lap, the 11 inch is more balanced and it sits flatter. It's not as wobbly, just maybe because it's more compact overall and it works well. Even though you would think that this larger one would sit better, it's actually very top heavy just because of how heavy the iPad itself is. And so, I don't know, I don't think the experience is as good for people that type this way. And now it's time to compare the speakers. Both of these have quad speakers, which is great, but the larger iPad has them spread a little bit further apart, and there's a potential that Apple made better use of this larger chassis to make it sound better, so we're gonna test that out. Along with that, we have this new song, so I want you guys to let me know what you think of this new song compared to our previous one. If you have headphones, put them on, and let's go ahead and take a listen. All right, guys, let me know your thoughts down below, and also if you guys enjoyed this new song, if we should stick with it. To give you my opinion, I have to say I'm really surprised. I was not expecting the new one to sound that much better. Not only is it louder, which I expected to be a little bit louder, but the bass is much more deep and rich. That doesn't mean that the 11-inch sounds bad. It sounds excellent for a tablet, but if you care about sound quality and loudness, if you're watching movies, listening to music, the 12.9-inch is definitely better. And now let's cover the cameras and microphones, and the good news is that they are identical between both, so that doesn't force you to choose one over the other. The rear camera is the same. This front camera is this crazy ultra wide, so you guys can see that top camera right there. Both of them get the center stage feature, no differences. And now let's get into performance. Now, I typically wouldn't be doing this, but with the new M1 chip that's ultra powerful, the larger 12.9-inch model could get better performance because it has better cooling than the 11-inch. So I'm very curious. I am gonna start out with Geekbench 5. I'm gonna hit run. Actually, before that, you guys can see that both of these do have 8 gigs of RAM. We also do have one that's still completely sealed that has 16 gigs. So we're gonna do a dedicated video doing multiple different real life stress tests with different productivity tasks to see if the 16 gig gives you any more performance than the 8 gig. If you guys want to see that, click that subscribe button down below, and that also helps us to reach our goal of getting 1 million subscribers before the end of the year. We would greatly appreciate it. All right, look at that. The 11-inch actually was done slightly faster, and it does actually have a slightly higher score. It's nice seeing that over 1700, but in reality, the scores are almost identical. Now, before I do a much more difficult test that's much longer, I also want to go ahead and benchmark the graphics. So both of these have the 8-core graphics units from the M1. So instead of 7-core GPU, it's great that Apple did put in the 8-core units. And there you go. This time we have the opposite effect. The 12.9-inch is a little bit faster. In this case, almost 3% faster. So maybe cooling is starting to come in after we're doing multiple runs. But either way, the metal score is absolutely incredible for a tablet. We're getting insane levels of performance. So now I'm gonna go ahead and close this, and we're gonna run a much harder test. This is 3D Mark's Wildlife. This time we're gonna make sure both of these are running the extreme test. And let's go ahead and let this run. And take a look at that. the scores are identical. We have 29.8 frames per second compared to 29.8. So it looks like for regular tasks, there's not much of a difference at all, but there's one more test that we could do, and that is the extreme stress test, which is a 20-minute test that will just put these things to their limits. So let's go ahead and see if you're doing something long-term, tons of photo exports, video exports, whatever you're doing, let's see if that makes a difference. All right, guys, we are finished, and the results are much more interesting. It looks like over a period of 20 minutes, we definitely have a difference here. If we look at the stress test here, you see how quickly that drops down, levels out, and drops again. Whereas here, it's much more tapered on the 12.9 inch. Now, the best loop score, we got actually slightly higher, just a little bit higher than the 11 inch, but the lowest loop score, that definitely is a bigger difference. So it looks like both of these do actually throttle over time, which of course you can expect. These are super thin with a super powerful chip, but the 12.9 inch performs about 10% better once you actually heat this thing up. And as far as stability, that is also about 10% different, slightly more than that. So it looks like if you're somebody that pushes the machine to the extreme for a long period of time, maybe some productivity or even maybe gaming, once we have games that can take advantage of these CPUs, you will get better performance, about 10% better performance with a 12.9 inch. Now, I do have to say that I think that most people will not have an issue, and you should not choose the larger one because of the better performance, or just because of the better performance, because the M1 in this 11 inch is still super powerful even when it throttles down. And now it's time for probably the biggest difference that you guys have been waiting for, and that is the LCD display compared to Mini LED. Instead of having one backlight system, the 12.9 inch has Apple's new XDR system, which has 2,500 or so different zones of tiny LEDs that can adjust by themselves. And we're gonna look at some HDR footage and also blooming, which could be and is an issue with this. But because this display, Apple raised the base price of the 12.9 inch by another $100 compared to last year. So is it worth it? Now, first, I wanna test out the brightness and see, can this new 1000 nit or up to 1600 nits of brightness outshine the 600 nit regular iPad when you're actually adjusting it yourself. But the first thing that I noticed is that although I set both these to 50% using Siri, so they automatically perfectly adjusted, if you look at them from an off angle, you guys could probably tell the 11 inch with the LCD panel is much, much dimmer. So that top camera is directly above. They look pretty much identical, but from the side and from down here, there's a massive difference. So the viewing angles on the new Mini LED display, they are just much better. And as far as the maximum brightness, I went ahead and adjusted that top camera so it doesn't blow out, and they look exactly identical. So even though this one's rated up to 1,600 nits compared to 600, which is a massive difference, in reality, the brightness is the same. And Apple actually says that in their fine print. The extra brightness is only used for HDR. So now, with that said, let's go ahead and close this and take a look at some HDR footage. Now, these kind of things are always really hard to show off on camera because we're not recording or displaying in HDR, but I'm gonna do my best to just explain the differences. And right now I set that camera to about an average exposure, so this could be getting blown out. But taking a look at the video footage, the electricity right there is just coming out so much brighter. It's much more vibrant. But at the same time, the darker areas are also a little bit darker, which I don't know if I'm a fan of, at least in this brighter room environment. Bam, that lighting right there, it flashes, it really stands out compared to being kind of flat looking here. And wow, that stands out right there. I'm worried that it's just blown out for you guys, but to my eyes, it looks incredible. And the image is definitely better, at least with, scenes like this in this kind of a lighting. And right there, wow, that is popping way more. So it looks like for movies like Avengers, where you have a lot of color, you have specific really bright areas, this HDR effect, it just works really well, and it gives the image a lot more dynamics, I guess I should say. But then again, we are watching in the daytime. There's another difference between these two, and that is contrast. So let's go ahead and shut off the lights. All right, wow, look at that difference now. This is much more dramatic. Now we have the black bars here. I went ahead and I zoomed back out so you can see the black bars. This is gray here, clearly gray compared to pitch black. And not only that, but the actual contrast of the image you're watching, let me zoom in here again. The mini LED looks really nice, really contrasty. Oh my goodness, that is bright. You guys probably can't tell a difference because both of them are bright, but this really stands out. All right, if you're watching movies in a dark environment or YouTube videos, the difference is much bigger. And here's probably an even better difference. This is an OLED test on YouTube. Look at the difference in contrast. Once it's dark in your room, if you're watching a movie or an HDR video on YouTube, the difference is absolutely shocking, at least at these brighter levels. Now with that, not everything is great about mini LED displays. You guys may have heard of the blooming issues that people are talking about with this new 12.9 inch, and that is when you see a glow around edges of bright objects on dark backgrounds. Now the most extreme case is having pure black in the background and pure bright and then having it turned up. Now sitting here right now with this image that I downloaded specifically to show this off, honestly, at brightness that's normal, actually this is probably about 75% brightness, here I cannot see anything. The mini LED display looks perfect. And on the 11 inch, it also looks great. I could tell that the black isn't true black. It is a little bit gray. But if you go ahead and max out that brightness, let's go ahead and do that. Now what can I see? Well, if I'm sitting at an angle, especially if I go even more angle like this, I do start seeing a slight amount of glow around the outside, whereas with 11 inch, I see that glow, if you want to call it, across the whole display, but it's less noticeable because everything is gray instead of black, instead of just around the text. Now this is with the display maxed out, which I don't need. About 50% is perfect for this environment. Now when this is much more noticeable is if you shut off the lights. Let me go do that. And now that blooming effect from the zones is much more apparent. Now from the top down view, if I'm holding it correctly, it is still minor, surprisingly, with that white being so bright. And then if I look from an angle, I see it much more. And that's what some of the photos that I saw online, when it's off an angle, and then there's also what kind of camera you're using that comes into effect. And it's up to you. Do you want to deal with a little bit of blooming and the worst case of scenarios, which are not very likely, or do you want to have a display that is very gray in those exact same scenarios? That choice is yours. Now, if you want to know more about this, we actually did a dedicated video seeing if this blooming issue is an actual issue or not. And we show off a lot of different use cases, real world scenarios. So you guys can check that video out after this one. And now it's time for the verdict. Should you buy the 11 inch or should you buy the 12.9 inch? And for me, the choice is really easy. If you're somebody that is mostly using your tablet as a tablet and you're doing some productivity and you're budget conscious, I would definitely go for the 11 inch, even though I love the XDR display. The mini LED display looks fantastic, but the portability of this iPad packed with that performance and the fact that it costs $300 less and the keyboard case comes in at $50 less for the smaller one makes this such a great value. And personally, I would take it with me much more often and use it for a variety of tasks than the 12.9 inch, which is much bigger and bulkier. Now, for this one, if you're somebody that's doing a ton of productivity and you know you need that larger size and the extra weight doesn't matter, you will use it, then in that case, I would get the 12.9 inch. And of course, along with that, the very, very few of you out there that want to work with HDR content, you're doing HDR video editing or HDR photo editing, which is now starting to become a thing, you absolutely have to have the XDR mini LED display. Without that, you cannot do HDR editing, so the 11 inch will not work for that. But for most people, although this display is amazing, I would stick with the 11 inch. Of course, we have links to both these down in the description, and you guys can go ahead and check out the other great videos I mentioned right over there, and click above to subscribe if you enjoy this video. That will help us out and help us reach our goal of 1 million subscribers before the end of the year. That would be absolutely amazing. This is Max, and I'll see you in the next video.